Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing Son of Death, book number 2 in the Daughter of Fire saga by Stacey Willis. As a brief disclaimer, I did want to note that this video is not monetarily sponsored in any way. However, I did receive my advance copy of the book in order to review for you guys. I did want to mention a few trigger warnings, including a lot of sexual content, descriptions of abuse and torture, including a child, and additional torture and killing as well. So if any of these things are liable to bother or trigger you in any way, please have discretion while watching the rest of this review or reading the book. Son of Death is the second book in the Daughter of Fire saga by Stacey Willis. Stacey Willis does happen to be a Black lesbian non-binary author for anybody who prefers to prioritize diverse reads, and the book also does include a variety of diverse characters, including some bisexual, pansexual, non-binary, and a few other queer individuals of unspecified identity, which I do want to note is just, it is so fascinating to see a book with like not only one, but like a variety and multiple queer characters in it, because for myself at least, like that is incredibly realistic, but to see a book reflect that is honestly a little bit weird just because I've never experienced that before. Another thing somewhat related to diversity that I do want to note is that the book does feature a variety of characters with more fantasy-themed names or names of non-English origin, and the book does feature a pronunciation page, which I do quite like. However, a few names were left off of the pronunciation page that I feel like should have been added to the pronunciation page. But with all that ado, let's go ahead and talk about the book itself. It is told from the perspectives of Suran, Savannah, Thanatos, Nina, and Salem. The book takes place about 6 months after the events of Daughter of Fire, and it features Savannah, who is adjusting to her newfound status as a goddess, also known as the goddess Corey, and she is adjusting to this new lifestyle of immortality and her new duties that entails, including caretaking the spirits of the calendar, which are these childlike, whimsical, yet ancient beings that embody the spirit of all of the different holidays of the calendar. And one of those spirits, Pumpkin, the spirit of Halloween, goes missing. Thanatos is also revealed to have had a secret son that had to be kept a secret because of the previously in place treaty that got abolished by the end of Daughter of Fire. And now Salem, the Son of Death, is causing trouble in the mortal world, you know, similarly to Savannah. He has powers and all that kind of thing, and is wreaking havoc. So now he has to be retrieved and brought into the fantasy world, the fantastical, I don't remember what they referred to it as, the divine world. That's words. So Salem has to be brought into the divine world so he stops causing trouble for the mortals. Savannah, being the goddess of half-bloods, is charged with retrieving Salem and finding out what happened to Pumpkin. And in order to do so, she brings on our previous cast of characters from Daughter of Fire to help out the different events of this book, as well as a few new characters, including Apollo, who has a huge thing for Savannah, and Savannah is like not sure how to feel about it because, you know, he's an arrogant, cocky man whore of a god. So whilst all of this is happening, they also uncover the plot of the Daylight Oracle, one of 2 oracles that exist in the divine world who have prophecies. So like they're sisters, there's one in each world, and the one that is usually like housing up with the Olympic gods, the Daylight Oracle, has come up with this plot and plan to try and overthrow and take over Olympus. So she's causing a lot of havoc and adds to all of this trouble that Savannah and all of her friends have to try and figure out and deal with. So as for my own thoughts about the book itself, I'm gonna be honest here, and I will have to say that I did not like Son of Death quite as much as I liked Daughter of Fire, because if anybody saw my previous review for Daughter of Fire, you will know that I was a big fan of the book. I thought that it was quite interesting. I thought conceptually it was really fun and it was written fairly well. And I just didn't get quite the same vibe from Son of Death. I think that plot-wise it was okay and interesting enough, but I thought that overall the writing style felt a little bit more stiff and less casual than the last book, making it feel less organic, especially when it came to the dialogue. And most prevalently when it came to Savannah's dialogue, it felt like it was a complete 180 tone shift from how she spoke in the first book. For example, like, girl does not know what contractions are. So like, instead of saying don't, she says do not. But like for every little thing, just making her sound a little bit more stiff and like unnecessarily pretentious. This could have possibly been a way of the author conveying the difference between Savannah as her human self transforming into the goddess Corey. But if that is the case, I just feel like it missed the mark a little bit, and I would have preferred a little bit more tone consistency, especially with the majority of the book having Savannah feel conflicted about the difference between like her human and her goddess self. And that's like a major plot point, is kind of transforming from one aspect to the other. So like it would have made more sense if the difference had been gradual throughout the book. Now, I didn't really have this tone consistency issue with many of the other characters. I felt like overall, like Thanatos was still pretty much the same as he had been, and same with Suren. I felt like he was also fairly similar to how he was in the first book, if a little bit more casual, but again, that's more along the lines of just like character development than tone shift, so it makes sense. It was primarily Savannah, which another thing when it comes to Savannah, and especially like her chapters and points of view, I did notice, and I'm not entirely sure if this was a thing in Daughter of Fire. If it was, I didn't personally notice it, but in Son of Death, the only first person point of view was Savannah. Like the only person who had their chapters told from the like I perspective was Savannah, whereas all of the other characters were more third person, which I thought was an interesting choice. I didn't dislike it at all. I just happened to notice it and I was like, oh huh. And it makes me wonder if the intent was to show that like at the end of the day, this is still Savannah's story more so than anybody else's. I'll be honest, Son of Death didn't quite trigger as strong visuals as Daughter of Fire did, because if you've seen my review, you will know that Daughter of Fire like was extremely visually vivid for me, and again, I quite enjoyed it, whereas Son of Death didn't quite get to the same levels. And I don't know if that just had to do with me having such high expectations for being such a fan of the first one and for having immediately read the first one followed by the second, or if it has to do partially with the tone shift. I would have to say that like the tone shift of Savannah definitely didn't improve my own reading experience. One thing that I did really enjoy about the book was the concept of the spirits of the calendar. I thought was a really fun way to introduce a new set of divine beings into the mix without it feeling weird or forced. They weren't mentioned at all in the first book, so it was a new concept, but I think that it worked out okay. And just the idea of having spirits of the calendar and these entities that like correlate with the different holidays, I think is a really, really fun and fascinating one. I would have liked to have seen it have a little bit more of a traditional take on it though, because for example, some of the spirits included the spirit of Halloween, the spirit of Christmas, the spirit of April Fool's Day, of Valentine's Day, of New Year's, you know, a bunch of these more modern holidays. And I would have liked a little bit more of a traditional take, because a lot of these holidays are much more modern than, you know, like the Olympic gods would be or anything like that. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the historical aspect. So like maybe instead of the spirit of Easter, it was more so just like there's the spirit of the spring solstice, or there was the spirit of Astara or something like that. Or if we had gotten a little bit of backstory of the transition from, you know, traditional holidays, especially like ancient Greek holidays to what they are now as modern entities. But overall, I thought the concept of having them and the potential for how they could develop in future installments is a really fun concept. Another concept that I thought was fun was obviously now we get to see Savannah's transition from mortal into being a goddess and her immortality. The book had like a 6-month time jump from the end of Daughter of Fire, where at the end, like the words, where that book ended with Savannah becoming the goddess Corey. So now at the beginning of Son of Death, obviously, like, she's been the goddess Corey for 6 months, but she's still getting used to a lot of things and she's still doing a lot of learning. So I honestly could have lived without the 6-month time jump. They could have just said that it was like immediately afterwards or like just a couple weeks afterwards. And I would have thought that it like fit in fairly well, just because the whole immortality thing still seemed very, very new to Savannah. And I think we could have developed a little bit more on that and shown even more of her learning and getting used to all of these new abilities that she has. And I really would have liked to have seen them expand upon the concept of immortality and the exact specifics of the nature of the gods, because I feel like Savannah, like, she's immortal and she's a goddess, but she still seems pretty vulnerable. Like, even more so than she had been as a Grim Reaper. And I feel like that doesn't quite track for, you know, being a god, because if that were the case, like, more of the Olympians would have been killed by time this modern storyline was happening. When it comes to interpersonal relationships within the book, I thought that similarly to Daughter of Fire, because I had the same criticism of Daughter of Fire, I feel like the emotional conflicts were resolved a little bit too quickly, and there were definitely still the extremes of emotional responses. So with future installments, I would like to see that evened out a little bit more. And not only with the extremes of the emotional responses, but the quick timeline that they're resolved in. Again, it feels like the resolution of issues happened fairly quickly when we could have stood to have them last for a few pages. And then the few emotional conflicts that did last for longer periods of time, I feel like are ones that would have benefited from being ones that were solved a little bit more quickly. Maybe I will just personally never be happy with the emotional conflict time blocking that these books have. There are just certain things that I think could stand to have a little bit more of a grudge held with them, and then there are some things that would have been more quickly resolved with better communication, you know, and that's just 100%, you know, could be a difference in how different people in real life handle different emotional responses. All right. So the first book in Daughter of Fire, the way that I read and interpreted at least, I thought that there was like a definite like future romance hinted between Savannah and Seren, and like I definitely thought that that's what we were building up to, and that Savannah and Seren were gonna end up being endgame. And then Son of Death just completely threw that out the window for me, because they introduced the character of Apollo. Well, technically Apollo was introduced at the very end of Daughter of Fire, but I didn't think he was going to end up being a primary character in the series. So I was definitely wrong about that, because he helps with a lot of the different plot conflict, and he adds to it a bit of his own, because he is like infatuated with Savannah. And Savannah is very conflicted about it, because she can't tell if she hates him or if she's into him or like what her deal is. She just knows she has a lot of strong feelings for Apollo and can't quite place which end of the spectrum they're on. And I am not opposed to this idea at all. Like, Savannah can totally have different love interests. I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the background as to the explanation of it, you know? I feel like we didn't get a ton of interactions between Savannah and Apollo that showed why I thought they were into each other. We were kind of just told, like, hey, they've been interacting for, like, they're into each other. I just didn't see it. It felt like they were already, you know, an item, and I didn't get to see the development of that, like what exactly Apollo's appeal to Savannah was. And I think that would have been fun to develop into a little bit more. But I do find myself a little bit disappointed that Seren was an endgame, because I think that they could have made a cute couple. Like, if we're gonna involve romance, I didn't think that romance with Savannah needed to be introduced at this point in the book, with her history of like the betrayal of her ex-boyfriend and then this newfound status of like being an immortal. Like, she could have sworn off guys for a while and it would have felt perfectly normal within the capacity of the book, especially because we get to see romance in so many other aspects. There are definitely a lot more pairings in Son of Death than there had been in Daughter of Fire. And on the topic of all of these couples, oh my god, let me tell you. So this book had a ton of sexual content in it, whereas the first book didn't at all, really. So I was incredibly surprised, especially because like the book almost opens with a partial sex scene, and I was immediately just like blushing because I wasn't expecting it. I'm not personally somebody who like generally enjoys sex scenes in books, simply because more often than not I'm reading young adult books, and so it's always written awkwardly, or it's like, y'all are underage and I don't want to be reading this, or it's just kind of written poorly because like editors will have certain standards for like what you can include and what you can't for certain age groups and blah 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 blah. And apparently we don't have that problem with indie publishing because, oh my god, like I'd say some of the best written and most vivid descriptions came from the sex scenes that we got in the book. I cannot confirm or deny, but I would not be surprised to hear that she had some previous experience with it, because it definitely read like it. But yeah, for the most part, I kind of thought that the sex scenes were like the most well written out of any particular plot points. I will have to say my one major issue was instead of using the word orgasm, which is like, fine, fucking use, instead we got to hear the term shattering every time. And that just, it made it feel like it was so well written, and then I'm like, ooh, now I feel like I'm reading fan fiction. So I could have lived with some more anatomically correct words being used in conjunction with it. Like, sure, if you want to say shatter once or twice, whatever. But like every time when I feel like different words would have been better used, you know. But again, you know, certain people have certain opinions on how these kinds of things are written. So like, personal preference, just fucking say orgasm. I feel like I would have been more comfortable had they just said it instead of being like, oh, shattering. Like, that just, like, that makes it feel almost like you're trying to hide what it is, and it's like, nah, just, they fucking finished, like, you know? Another thing I do want to mention, not related to the sex stuff, is Savannah's character had such a complete 180 in character development, whereas in Daughter of Fire, I felt like she was very, very selfish to the detriment of her character, whereas in Son of Death, she's incredibly selfless and puts a lot of other people first, but it also ends up being to the detriment of her character, because she ends up not fully thinking through the repercussions of certain actions because she's trying to be selfless and like help other people, but isn't looking at the overall picture and how that's going to affect other things that could potentially be more important. But that also being said, I do think that we didn't get to see a lot of lasting repercussions of pretty much anything. A lot of the conflicts are solved a little bit more quickly than my personal liking. Because like I said in my first review, I don't like conflicts that last, you know, extended periods of time if it's not central to the primary plot. But that being said, I feel like even the primary plot was just moving a little faster than it needed to. We could have like taken a step back and had a little bit more development and lasting consequences and repercussions of certain actions, because as it was, it felt a little bit convenient. But at the same time, it did push the story forward infinitely more than the last book had. So it really depends on your own personal preference if you want to see a ton of story happen within a series, or if you would prefer things to be a little bit longer stated. Overall, I didn't dislike the book at all. Like, I enjoyed the book. I just didn't enjoy it quite as much as I had Daughter of Fire. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all. Peace.